Good morning. My name is Sam Summers. I'm a behavioral scientist, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what behavioral science tells us about human nature and how that's relevant to the kind of work that everyone in this room here today does. My argument is going to be the one you just heard about from Frank, which is that context, who we're with, what's going on in our immediate environment, the actual physical circumstances in which we find ourselves, those have a dramatic ability to shape how we think, how we act, who we are as people, but that's quite often a conclusion that we look right past. And so my argument here today is going to be that learning to appreciate and in fact embrace that role of context makes us more effective people, makes us more effective when it comes to our personal lives, but certainly makes us more effective when it comes to our working lives and our professional lives. And so what I'd like to do actually is start us with a bit of a story that puts me behind the wheel at the tail end of my morning routine of getting two small individuals dressed out the door and dropped off at school in the morning. Now, again, I said this was the tail end of this routine, so mind you, it has already taken tremendous reservoirs of strength, patience, and endurance to get to this point, right? To drag hairbrushes through tangles of hair to make sure that the right shoes are on the right feet, to make sure that all pairs of tights and underwear have been put on right side out and under the aforementioned shoes. And that's just to get myself dressed. I got to get the kids ready now too, right? And so we're in the car and we're driving, and the last remaining obstacle between us and the successful completion of this morning mission is the rotary, as we call it around here. Perhaps you call it a traffic circle or a roundabout, if you're also 4 years old, maybe the round and round. And in my car, when we get to the round and round, the pastime is we count down the number of cars before us as we wait in line. But on this day, the countdown stalls at 4. And a little voice from the back seat says, "Dad, what's going on? Why aren't we moving? Why aren't we counting?" And I say, "Well, honey, the guy in the red car in the front of our line, isn't moving right now. We've got to be a little bit patient, because you have to sometimes be a little bit patient and allow people to, marshal their strength and lead the troops into battle." I mean, you get, I think, about 8 seconds in most scenarios. That's about the maximum that you get in this town. We've all seen this sign, state law, drivers yield to rotary traffic, but we know there's some wiggle room there, that doesn't have to be interpreted literally, right? You'd sit there all day. This is, again, you don't take that at face value. And so I will say that I was not the only person honking my horn that morning at the rotary. I may have been the first. I was not the only person, however, but quite quickly there's a cacophony of car horns, and again a voice from the back says, "Daddy, what's going on?" And I said, "Well, honey, red Nissan here needs to learn how to drive." To which her response is, "Learn how to drive? You mean he didn't go to preschool when he was a kid?" To which I replied, "His dad didn't drive fast enough to get him to school on time, I'm sure, honey." And so at this point, again, car horns are blaring. This mad scene at the rotary. After 2 minutes that seem more like 20, we pull in to the rotary. And again, a voice from the back asked me a question, but I'm still fairly agitated with red Nissan, and I don't hear it. And I say, "I'm sorry, honey, ask again." And she says, "Well, why were there flags on all the cars?" And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. What? They're little blue flags on the cars in the round and round, and their lights are on, but it's not nighttime. Right. So, the ton of bricks that is the guilt and realization of what has happened hits me, and I explain to my daughter in the back seat that, that's a funeral procession. You have to wait patiently, respectfully, for those to go by. There is a moral to my story here, my morning at the rotary, a moral that transcends the twofold conclusion that I am apparently a very impatient driver and a lousy role model for my children. And that moral is that we spend much of our day-to-day existence, life, work time, personal time in environments that are somewhat familiar, but we don't fully grasp the entirety of those circumstances, that we are quite often blind to aspects of the context in which we operate on a regular basis. What I mean by that, this idea of the hidden power of context, is what I want to talk to you about today. It applies to the morning commute in the rotary, but it applies to our lives as parents, our lives as employees, our lives as managers, and so forth. And what do I mean here by this hidden power of context? Well, let me give you another example or two. I think, again, we spend the vast majority of our time in very familiar circumstances, very familiar environments, but we don't realize the nuances of those environments that shape how we think and how we act and who we are. It takes often the jolt of the unfamiliar to make us sort of come back and realize what the familiar was all about. So anyone who's ever traveled, of course, you travel abroad, all right, you spend time as a foreigner in a different land, and you quite quickly not only come to realize all these unwritten rules and regulations that you don't quite grasp on your own, but then you come back home and you gain a newfound appreciation that they're there in place at home as well, and we just look right past them, right? I mean, the most overt and blatant of them would be something like street signs, road signs. I mean, if you are South African and you see this road sign, perhaps immediately you realize this is a ban on street side vendors. If you're an American who's traveling in South Africa, you see this and you think, don't stack your cannonballs under the pretty parasol. It's unclear what this means. And this is just a street sign. This is very overt, but it happens, again, with eye contact and personal distance and physical touching. You come back home and you recognize there are all these unwritten rules and regulations and expectations at home that you don't fully appreciate when you're there. Or take the experience of returning to your childhood home as a visitor, the first time you do that. For me, that was the freshman year of college, Thanksgiving break, and you fly home and you walk into this house and all of a sudden it hits you. This house has a smell. It has a sound. It has a feeling. Everyone else's house has always had smells and sounds and feelings. My house did not. It was just my house. But now that you come back and it's not your house anymore, you're sort of hit in the face by this realization that there was this environment there that you were looking right past. Or take the way that we think, right? Cognitive scientists refer to this as state-dependent learning. It's the idea that aspects of an environment that are present at one point in time, when they're also present later on when you are tested on information, it leads you to do better on the test that you are given. So for example, there's something to the notion of sitting in the same seats when you were being tested on material in a classroom setting that you were sitting in during the lectures themselves. Or, here I'm showing you chocolate. There are studies that suggest that odors in the room when you're learning information, if they're also present later on, you do a better job remembering that earlier information. So they pipe in chocolate to the room while you're learning a set of words. And then when you're tested on these words, they pipe in that smell again. And when they do that at both times, at the beginning and again at the end, you do better in terms of remembering the information that you were asked to memorize. Well, my argument here today is that we do the same thing with people. That our perceptions of other people, our interactions with other people are dramatically shaped by the context in which we find ourselves, even though that's not something that we are always attending to or that we're always fully aware of. So I'm actually going to ask for your help with a little bit of an exercise here, some mental exercise. I'm going to give you 30 seconds of my valuable time, and here's what I need you to do valuable because I see it dripping away in front of me on this clock. And so I'm going to give you 30 seconds, 25 now, and I need you to do the following. I need you to think of a trivia question. Okay? A really good, challenging trivia question that you could use to stump one of the other smart people in this room here this morning. I don't care what the topic is, doesn't matter at all, anything at all, as long as you know the answer to it. And you're down to like 10 seconds now, so you have to think of a good trivia question in your head that you could use to stump someone else in this room. Go ahead. All right, now I want you to imagine the following. Imagine I had a hat with everyone in this room and all of your names in that hat. And I pulled two of them out at random. And I asked those two individuals to come up to this stage in front of this room of people, in front of these video cameras, and to stand on stage here with me. And those two people from this room who I brought up to the stage, I said, well, here are your roles. I'm going to flip a coin. And the coin goes up in the air, and depending on the coin flip, one of the individuals who I brought up to the stage with me has to stand over here. Has to stand over here and play the role of questioner, of quiz show host. Has to ask the question that she or he has come up with out loud in front of all these people of the other individual. The other individual, by virtue of the coin flip, stands over here and is on the hot seat and has to answer that question. That question that could have been about any topic at all has to answer that question in front of all of these nice-looking individuals, in front of the video camera, to be viewed in perpetuity by whoever has access to it, has to stand here in public and answer that question. And now I want you to imagine the experience of the rest of us, who are not either of those two people, who are sitting and watching this interaction. Right? We're aware of the totality of that situation, of the totality of these circumstances. We are aware of the fact that which side of the stage these two people have been assigned to was dictated by the vagaries of a coin flip. Right? That but for that coin flip having landed the way it did, the person over here might be over there, the person over there might be over here. We fully recognize that. We're aware of the entirety of that situation. All right. This is not just a hypothetical. This is not just a sort of quick mental exercise. Let me explain to you why we're talking about this. A couple of decades ago, researchers at Stanford did this very study. They had individuals come up with a list of questions. They at random pulled two of them up in front of the stage. They flipped a coin and assigned one to the role of quiz show host or questioner. They assigned the other to the role of quiz show contestant or answerer. And they didn't do the one question in 30 seconds. They did 10. So the job of these individuals was to write down 10 trivia questions, tough trivia questions about whatever topics that they wanted. And they posed these questions of the other individual and so forth. Now, this is a study run at Stanford. These are pretty smart individuals. On average, out of 10, there are 10 questions they're given. The average number of correct responses that the game show contestant who's standing over here is able to answer is 4. 40%. It's a failing grade. And it's a failing grade because when you think about this task to its completion, it's a really hard task, right? To subject yourself to the idiosyncratic knowledge base of somebody else. I do a version of this example in my classes, and let me show you the kinds of eclectic mix of questions I get from students when they do this exercise. Here's one example. Number 1, name all 5 members of NSYNC. Number 2, who was the only president to serve on the Supreme Court. Number 3, name all 5 members of the Backstreet Boys. Perhaps for you, this combination of judicial political history and pop music boy bands is right up your alley. Maybe that's your wheelhouse. Right? It was for that person. But for most of us, one of those two, if not both, pose a challenge to try in terms of getting these questions right. Now, that's actually not the interesting aspect of the Stanford Quiz Show study. 4 out of 10, that's the response on average. Okay. What's interesting, though, is how does everyone else view this? How does everyone else in the audience who's watching this interaction unfold in front of them, how do they evaluate the two people standing in front of them participating in this quiz show? The researchers asked them one simple question. I want you to rate on a scale of 0 to 100 the breadth of general information possessed by these two people, by our quiz show host over here and by our quiz show contestant over here. Right? How do you rate on a scale of 0 to 100 their general information, how much information they possess in general? And again, they know everything that we all know, that it was the coin that dictated who would be on which side of the stage. And nonetheless, here's what they say. Average rating is 82 for your host and 47 for your contestant. Even though you know, the people in the study as well know that it's the coin that dictated that one person got to stand here and look smart because she got to read off her questions based on her own idiosyncratic body of knowledge. And that the other person never got a chance to show off what his questions were. He was just subjected to the questions that she had come up with. We know that. But yet we can't resist the temptation to draw some sort of internal conclusion about these two people. More or less thinking, well, she seems a little bit smarter than he does. This is what we do on a regular basis. We see personality type, we see consistent character, we see stable predisposition. That's how we think about other people around us. I'll give you one last example, and then we'll talk about what this all means and what we do about it. Right? Think about the news story you read about the tourist who's visiting, let's say, New York, and riding the subway, and then passes out on the subway and is slumped over and actually winds up dead on the subway, riding around the subway as a dead body for hours with no one intervening, no one doing anything, no one stopping to check if he's okay. What do? We indict the people on that train as being unusually callous people. Right? We think about maybe city dwellers everywhere as being indifferent to the plight of their fellow man and woman. That's a cop-out and a oversimplification of what really is going on in these scenarios. There are factors that make any of us more or less likely to attend to get involved with, to try to make a difference and an impact on the lives or the interactions or the projects of other people around us. One of the biggest ones in the subway example, and more organizationally, as we'll talk about it here today, one of the biggest ones is simply being in a crowd, right? Being around other people, being in a group, being in a crowd in public, being in an organization. These experiences change who we are. They change how we think, they change how we interact, they change the kind of people that we are. I'm going to give you at least 3 reasons why that's the case. Right? At least 3 different ways in which being in a group of people, being in a crowd, being in an organization changes our psychology. Number 1, being in a group, being in a crowd makes us less likely to notice what's going on in the life, in the experiences, in the day-to-day operations of any one individual around us. That seems ironic. That being in a group of people makes us turn on the blinders perceptually. You think about what it's like walking around, let's stick with the subway example, a busy city street or a subway car. It's loud, right? It's crowded. You have to put on tunnel vision to get your stuff done, to get done what it is that you sought to do and why you left the house that morning. We do the same things in organizations. We're so caught up in the blocking out the noise, right? The static, and focusing on what we need to get done that we don't notice the new individual in our department who's treading water and barely able to figure out what it is that's being expected of him or her. Or we don't notice the entire department in the organization that isn't being given the resources necessary in order to get done the assignments that are being dropped on their laps. We become focused on our own work because we know we have to block everything else out to be productive. Being in the presence of others, whether on a crowded subway car, whether in an organization, makes us less likely to notice what's going on around us. Number 2, it makes us less likely to interpret what's happening around us as something important that needs our intervention. So on the subway, what happens is you walk onto the subway car, you see, maybe you do notice, there's a guy slumped over, and then you look around. And what's everyone doing? Reading the newspaper, sitting there calmly. And so you figure, they've been on the car longer than I have, they must know something I don't know, everything must be okay. Maybe this guy always rides the subway car and takes a big nap and looks like he's half dead. I don't know. They seem to know something about him. I assume everything is okay. We do the same thing in organizations. We assume, why are things being done this way? Well, if there was a better way, a more efficient way to do this, someone would have thought of it already. Right? Everyone else here has been here longer than I have. They have more experience than I. This company predates my arrival here. They have a sense of how to get this done. If there were a better way to do it, we'd already be doing it. One of the major obstacles to innovation is the assumption that everyone else knows something that you don't know. Everyone else is feeling the same way, and this pluralistic ignorance arises from the group at large, and you don't get innovation. You don't get intervention from any party. And number 3, when we're in a crowd, when we're in a group, when we're in an organization, responsibility diffuses. We allow other people to pick up the slack. Whether it's the crowded movie theater and the film goes out of focus, we assume someone else is going to take care of it. Whether we assume someone else is going to help the passenger on the subway car. Whether it's the mass email that comes to us at work and we see all the other people listed and figure, well, that's not my problem. Somebody else will step up and take care of that. Right? All of those are reasons why being in the presence of others, being in organizations, changes our psychology. In fact, it's enough to simply think about being in a group, to simply think about being in a crowd, to lead to these kinds of effects. If you ask people to visualize themselves in a crowded movie theater or out to dinner with a large group of people, and subsequent to that you ask them to make a donation to charity, to donate their time to a volunteer cause, people become less attentive to the needs of others after having just visualized themselves in a crowd. So just visualizing ourselves in an organization, that's enough to make us, to kickstart a lot of these processes that we've been talking about. So what do we do at a general level? How do we combat these tendencies that we have to stay to the sidelines, to be focused only on our own needs, to not attend to and get involved in the affairs of the others around us who need that kind of intervention? Well, number 1, we force ourselves to take off the blinders, whether that literally means taking the headphones out on the subway or not always thumbing through our smartphone every chance we get, or whether that means, forcing yourself to to walk the proverbial mile in the shoes of the people in the department down the hall, whether that means taking people from that department with which you have very little interaction out to lunch and forcing there to be some sort of interaction, because we know that when you take people and move them from stranger or acquaintance to friend, co-worker, colleague, what have you, these processes of apathy become much less likely to manifest themselves. Number two, we don't assume everything is okay. So whether that's the ambiguous noise or scream you hear outside in the middle of the night that you follow up on in the more sort of personal life example, or whether that is, again, this idea that, you know what, let's question this, there must be a better way to do this. There's always room for improvement, for streamlining, for making more efficient, effective, and so forth. And we force ourselves to stop diffusion of responsibility. Knowing that it's there, that it tends to happen, we call out an individual person and give a specific request for, hey, I need your help with this, as opposed to the mass email request, and so on and so forth. And so that's my argument for you here today, that we, on a regular basis, as human beings, as parents, as significant others, as spouses, as employees, as managers, and so forth, do not tend to think about the ways in which context, environments shape human tendencies, shape the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate, and the kind of people that we actually are. And that by paying more attention to these issues on a regular basis, we can become more efficient, more effective individuals at work, managing other people, negotiating, whether that negotiation is with employees, with managers, or for that matter with your kids about bedtime, and you know, in our personal as well as our professional lives. At the very least, it enables you to get to the point where you can, you know, rest comfortably at night, fairly confident that you won't be honking at funerals, but more profound implications as well, I think, for the way we manage other people, evaluate other people, and think about the workplace experiences that others in our environment are having that we don't always necessarily think about from a very rigorous or fully considerate perspective. Thank you very much.